When we need to travel from point A to point B today, we're inundated with options. Modern transportation optimizes for time, comfort and convenience, but rarely so for the environment and ecosystem we drive or ride around in. On Eco India this week, let's look at how we can marry modern mobility solutions and environmental sustainability. Hello and welcome, I'm Sanuta Raghu. First, let's zoom in on some numbers to understand the impact of transportation on our environment and take stock of what green solutions are already in practice.
The transportation of people and goods accounts for almost 1/3 of global CO2 emissions. During the coronavirus crisis, lockdowns and suspended travel resulted in a drop in worldwide emissions from 8.5 to 7.2 gigatons. But that figure needs to be reduced further to 5.7 gigatons by 2030 to meet the Paris Climate Agreement target that seeks to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. According to the International Energy Agency, policies that promote the blending of true low-carbon fuels are critical to decarbonize aviation, shipping and heavy-duty road freight. But almost half of the CO2 emitted by the transport sector is generated by cars and other light vehicles. At 3.3 gigatons per year, eco-friendlier technologies and better urban infrastructure could allow us to stay mobile while emitting far less CO2. Look at Oslo. Despite growth, CO2 emissions are dropping in Norway's capital. Direct greenhouse gas emissions from road traffic have dropped by more than 15% since 2009. One of the reasons is a reduction in car traffic in Oslo, tolls on cars entering the city, and car-free zones aim to make driving less attractive. Former parking spaces now serve as bike lanes. Boosting public transport's appeal is another solution. Pune is the 7th most populous city in India. Here, even school children learn how to get around town in an eco-friendly way. They're encouraged to use the bus rapid transit network. Most of the buses currently run on natural gas. But 300 in the fleet are already powered by electricity. Alternative means of propulsion, such as electricity or hydrogen, are still only found in just under 1% of all vehicles worldwide. Higher purchase prices and a lack of loading stations are reasons. For two-wheelers, loading stations and small neighborhood stores could be part of the answer. With some 12 million of these stores in India, they could drive the shift to electric motorbikes. Electric-powered air cabs and transport drones are best suited to short distances, but mass production is still a long way off. In the short term, cable cars could also relieve traffic congestion. In Bolivia, Mexico and in Colombia, they are already integrated into the public transport system. It's an idea that's also in the pipelines in India, where a ropeway service is planned for the city of Varanasi.
Now, the humble bicycle occupied a special place among working-class Indians for decades, especially because it was cost-effective and utilitarian. Modernization introduced faster modes of transportation, and bicycles were sidelined. But in the last few years, with increasing traffic congestion and pollution, many cities in India introduced private pay-as-you-go bikes. We visited Ahmedabad in West India to understand how they fit into the city's mobility plan.
Ankit Kamdar cycles for part of his 5-kilometer commute into work. But he doesn't own a cycle. He rides a different one each day. And it's always ready to go with a click, through an app. It is part of one of India's largest bike-sharing services called My Bike, and Kamdar really enjoys it.
ये माई बाइक मुझे इसीलिए बेस्ट लग रही है।
I really like my bike because the cycles are equipped with baskets where I can store things like my laptop, lunchbox and water bottle. For my commute, I cycle to the bus stand and park the bike over there. Then I take a bus, a few stops and grab another my bike to reach my office.
मैं माई बाइक लेके मेरी ऑफिस तक जाता हूँ वस्त्रापुर।
Kamdar lives in Ahmedabad, which, like other cities in India, is working to integrate cycle sharing into the public transport system. Here, that system includes a fleet of buses that operate in normal traffic, as well as others assigned their own dedicated lanes. Growing pollution has spurred the push for better public transport across Indian cities. The biggest cause for this is vehicles, whose ownership is going up across the country. And therefore, so is the traffic, which causes more pollution and higher emissions. Ahmedabad is known to have one of the best public transport systems in India, but there is room for improvement. A recent study found that more people would use public transport if the city improved what's known as last mile connectivity. That is transport that bridges the gap between travelers' homes and their nearest bus or metro stop.
What we tried to do was to talk to people about their travel behavior in terms of how are they traveling, where to where do they go, and what are the modes that they typically use. It is not just focused on bus, it is also focused on shuttle, auto rickshaw, it's also focused on the other modes of travel. So understanding their travel needs is what we were trying to do. Last mile connectivity is very important for the public transportation network.
At the Center of Excellence for Transport in Ahmedabad, urban planning experts worked with a focus group to advance the city's public transport system. For their last mile or more, passengers traditionally have depended on rickshaws, private or shared, or simply on their own 2 feet. But rickshaw services can be unreliable or expensive, and walking can be uncomfortable and even unsafe, particularly for women. Chartered accountant Arjit Soni is trying to offer an alternative with My Bike. He launched the service in 2013 and initially spent years optimizing it by studying commuter behavior. He believes bike sharing is the key to solving the problem of last mile connectivity and more.
You're talking about health issues, My Bike is one of the answer. You're talking about climate change, My Bike is one of the answer. You talk about urban mobility, traffic congestion, My Bike is the answer. You talk about mental health and happiness. I'm sure not many people realize this, but a lot of My Bikers ride My Bike because of the mental strength and happiness that they get out of it.
Other bike sharing platforms exist in Ahmedabad too, but this one is among the largest. It now has 10,000 cycles used by over 500,000 people across the country. At 2 rupees or less than 3 cents a day, bought through the app, the service is affordable and appeals to a wide consumer base.
I'm of the firm belief that convenience sells. So is my alternative that I'm presenting going to be convenient for a user? If yes, then I have a market for my product. If no, time will tell. And that's how we positioned My Bike. We made the service available at the stations.
City officials have also made note of its potential to boost public transport and help cut carbon emissions from private vehicles. In 2014, it started its own bike-sharing project called Ahmedabad to integrate mobility services like My Bike into the city-wide network.
So we have introduced this Ahmedabad system into the BRTs. We have provided them space along with the BRTS corridor, and now the people can use the cycle to reach their destination, and they can use the BRTs as their main transport medium.
Currently, only 13% of Ahmedabad's residents use public transport. That's lower than the country average. But with the metro network under construction, the city is seeking to increase that share to 30% by 2030. Riders like Ankit Kamdar give officials hope that Ahmedabad will reach that goal. He used to be the only one in his office who cycled to work. Now, several of his colleagues have already followed his lead.
bicycles have made a comeback world over, especially with their promise of being environmentally friendly. A project in Colombia's capital, Bogota, is experimenting with using electric bikes to transport goods to the city center. How's it faring? Let's take a look.
Bogota is a big, dirty, and noisy city. Air pollution kills about 2,000 people here every year. The air quality in the Colombian capital is often so bad that an environmental state of emergency has to be declared. Greenhouse gas emissions linked to the transporting of goods by road contribute significantly to the problem, but that is set to change. In part thanks to people such as Daniel Sanchez. He used to be part of the problem. Now he's part of the solution, a pioneer of change on the streets of Bogota.
I used to drive a truck. There were always two of us. Everything took a long time because of the traffic jams and having to look for a place to park. It was really tiring.
Now he drives an electric delivery tricycle. This is the cross-docking station at the edge of the city center. Goods are transferred here from large trucks to the small eco-friendly vehicles for delivery into downtown. The project was launched by the municipality. Since last year, the Green Alliance has headed the city government for the first time.
Transport is responsible for about 79% of particulate emissions here, and 39% of that amount results from transporting goods by road. By switching to these new vehicles, we can cut emissions by 16 metric tons a day, so the impact will be huge.
The World Bank has made $300,000 available to the project. It's still early days. During the current pilot phase, the fleet of small electric delivery vehicles numbers just 15. They're the work of a startup in Medellin. But the model designed for that city needs to be adapted to conditions in Bogota.
The logistics are very different from Medellin. In Bogota, retailers aren't concentrated in one district. Distances covered are much larger, so the wear and tear on the electric components is greater. We need to innovate and start working on improving the motor and the battery, so we can provide the companies in the project with an efficient solution.
The Lola cargo tricycles can carry 1 cubic meter of goods. That's about 1/8 the volume of a standard delivery truck. Daniel Sanchez's destinations today are small shops and pharmacies. He works on commission, so for him, time is money, and he zips from one customer to the next. He maneuvers his electric bike through traffic jams. He's glad to be rid of his truck.
In traffic, it's just the best thing. I can go bike lanes and sidewalks, anywhere, and I can take shortcuts. I can get to any point really fast. It's much better than before.
Not being stuck in traffic, not having to look for a parking place makes delivering goods more efficient. Several companies have signed up to the project. They not only want to cut their harmful emissions, but also save time and money doing so. Nutresa is a major manufacturer of processed and convenience foods. It's an ideal candidate for taking part in the pilot phase of the project. In Colombia, most of its products are sold in small corner shops and by street vendors.
El piloto lleva un mes.
The pilot phase has been running for just 1 month, but the results are already very significant and very positive. 6 other companies in the city have also joined the project, and I hope many more will too. Using sustainable methods of transport has many advantages for people's quality of life, the environment, and the development of urban logistics.
It's too soon to evaluate the pilot project as a whole. But Daniel Sanchez, for one, hopes it will prove a success and set a precedent. He says his workdays are a third shorter now and his earnings higher. He also enjoys the attention. Passers-by are fascinated.
When I imagine about, people ask me, "Is that your bike?" And I say, "Sadly, no, it's not." They find it really cool and think it's a good idea. No exhaust, nothing that harms the environment. I feel I'm promoting change.
He still takes the bus home, but he's saving up to buy a good bike, and then he will contribute even more to the greening of Bogota.
A key question in mobility planning is this: which fuel is most feasible while also being environmentally friendly? Hydrogen is often mentioned as the fuel of the future and as an alternative to fossil fuels. But can hydrogen really meet these high expectations? Our reporter tried to dig further.
We really have to talk about the big buzzword in the world of energy.
Hydrogen.
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 Take hydrogen.
The wonders of hydrogen.
It's the magic fuel that can power our cars, trucks, trains, ships and planes. And the best thing...
The only byproduct of consuming that fuel is water again and the energy that comes with it.
This all sounds great. Maybe just a little too great? Let's take a closer look and see what's behind the hype around hydrogen.
Today, almost all the hydrogen we produce is used to make other things like fertilizer or petroleum, but it's never made it big as a fuel. It's just always been easier and cheaper to directly burn fossil fuels instead, but that is changing. As the world is slowly waking up to the climate crisis, companies and entire countries are committing to not only reduce emissions, but to reach
net zero.
Net zero.
Zero emission. Net zero.
This is Meredith Annex. She's the lead hydrogen analyst at Bloomberg NEF, a market research firm.
But with net zero, everyone has to do something. And that means that you need solutions for areas where electricity is going to struggle to provide the solution. And that's where we see the sweet spot for hydrogen.
We can use hydrogen to clean up heavy transport. A study showed that pretty much all container ships going from China to the US could run on hydrogen fuel cells. They might only have to reduce cargo space by some 5% or at a refueling stop. While there are no hydrogen-powered ships traversing the oceans yet, there are some promising pilot projects. The same goes for aviation. In 2020, the first commercial-sized hydrogen-powered plane took off. And major aircraft manufacturer Airbus is working on 3 hydrogen models that it says might be ready to deploy as soon as 2035. Long-haul flights will probably be a challenge, but a new study estimates that even running short and medium-haul flights on hydrogen could cut aviation emissions by up to 1/3. This very simple element can actually solve a very complicated problem. It can help cut emissions in some of our most polluting sectors. So we're going to need a lot more of the stuff.
And this is where the whole thing gets a little bit tricky, because not all hydrogen is created equal. In fact, there's a whole rainbow of different ways to make the stuff.
The vast majority, almost 90% of all hydrogen that's produced today, is what's called grey hydrogen, made from fossil fuels, mainly natural gas. Making the fuel of the future that's supposedly so green is actually a pretty dirty business. If we want to use hydrogen as a clean fuel, we first need to clean up its production. And there are 2 main ways to go about this, the first one being blue hydrogen.
When we're talking about blue hydrogen, we're referring to fossil fuels with carbon capture and storage.
This means we still make hydrogen from natural gas in a process called steam methane reforming. That does produce CO2, but instead of letting these emissions escape into the atmosphere, producers claim they can catch them and then store them underground or turn them into materials we can use for other purposes.
Sounds pretty great, right? And it would be if it worked.
Blue hydrogen actually has a very, very large greenhouse gas footprint.
This is Robert Howarth, who co-authored a study that made quite a splash in the energy world.
Turns out that the greenhouse gas footprint of the blue hydrogen is worse than if you simply burned the natural gas directly for fuel instead. Nothing low emissions about it at all.
The oil and gas industry often promises to be able to remove around 90% of emissions when making blue hydrogen. But the reality looks different. Human rights NGO Global Witness calculated that this blue hydrogen facility in Canada, run by Shell, only manages to catch around half the emissions it creates. And this gets even worse when you take into account leaks along the supply chain while the gas is processed and transported. These release methane into the atmosphere, a greenhouse gas that in the short term is more than 80 times more powerful in warming the planet than CO2. But despite this, blue hydrogen made its way into the official hydrogen strategies of major economies like the UK, the US, Japan, and the European Union. Reports show that there were some pretty serious lobbying efforts behind that.
It's a direct strategy of the oil and gas industry, quite frankly. But again, the science doesn't support it. It's pure marketing. And it's marketing. The goal, let's be frank, is to keep selling fossil fuels to the world while pretending it's going to get better.
We wanted to hear what the oil and gas industry had to say about this, so we put these criticisms to the Hydrogen Council, an industry group which counts fossil fuel giants like BP, Shell, and Saudi Aramco among its steering members. Unfortunately, they said they didn't find the time to respond.
I think blue hydrogen is a mistake that will cost us a lot in the future.
This is Chris Jackson, who founded Protium, a UK company that focuses on green hydrogen.
But I don't believe that the way we resolve that is by arguing about it. I think it's about building better projects and better technologies. And that's what we want to do with green hydrogen.
To make green hydrogen, you simply use renewable energy from sources like wind or solar to power an electrolysis. This produces no emissions, so you end up with truly clean hydrogen.
Today, only a tiny fraction of hydrogen is green, and it's actually still pretty expensive compared to the other forms. But that is set to change for two reasons. One,
electrolyzers are getting cheaper because we're moving to larger projects with more upscaled manufacturing. So that's the biggest thing.
And two, prices for renewables have fallen consistently and continue to do so. Bloomberg NEF predicts that green hydrogen will be cheaper than blue hydrogen by around 2030 and cheaper than grey hydrogen by 2050.
So is that it? Problem solved. We just make tons and tons of green hydrogen and then run our entire economies on it. Well, unfortunately, it's not that simple.
One big challenge that remains is hydrogen's relatively low energy density. You need about 3 times more space to store the same amount of punch compared to natural gas. So we'll likely have to build a lot of new storage facilities, depending on how much hydrogen we'll actually need. And how much that's going to be is a tricky question.
Renewable electricity is still a scarce, precious resource, and we should use it as effectively and as efficiently as we can, and hydrogen may not be the best way to do that.
Hydrogen can be used for everything, but that doesn't mean it should. So the future is finding the balance between what we use for battery and what we use for hydrogen.
Passenger cars are a great example for this. They can run on hydrogen fuel cells, but turning electricity into hydrogen, transporting it to refueling stations, pumping it into a fuel cell to then convert it back to electricity is just not very efficient. About 60% of the energy you put in gets lost along the way. Alternatively, you could just use the same energy to directly charge a lithium-ion battery that powers an electric motor. Here, only 20% of the energy gets lost. With trucks, it's a slightly different story. It was long believed that batteries weren't going to work here. To move heavy trucks, you'd need loads of them, which take up valuable cargo space, and long charging times aren't really great for business either. But it seems this technology race isn't over yet. Batteries are becoming more powerful and charging times are going down, so much so that this recent study points towards battery electric trucks dominating the market in the future. Hydrogen is by no means the silver bullet that will help with everything, but it does make sense in some cases. So where do we go from here?
We're really at the point at which now a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of momentum has been built around hydrogen. And 2022 and through to 2026 are really the years where we now need to demonstrate that momentum is converting into real assets and real production of green hydrogen.
And if we don't see that this decade, then we're really going to be struggling to hit climate goals overall.
So now is the time for hydrogen to prove that it can really get as big as its hype.
Transportation for the future will surely need a rethink. Our current practices are harming the environment. There's no doubt about that. I hope today's episode has contextualized the problem for you and provided some solutions for the direction we should be moving towards. I'll leave you with that and see you again next week. From all of us in India and Germany, goodbye and thanks for watching.